Thank you so much for joining us today. We're very excited to have you here. As you may know or you may not know, this is the 6th annual Humanitarian OpenStreetMap Summit. So this is happening for the 6th time, and this is the most attended hot summit as compared to the other summits that have been held before. And we're so excited to have so many people joining us from different parts of the world. So if you'd like to let us know where you're coming from, you can kindly participate in our Menti poll. So I'll just share the link to that on chat as well, and the code to use. Yeah, so just click on the link and enter the code, and then share with us where you're from. We would like to see that and know where everyone is joining us, and so that you can learn from each other, we can talk to each other and connect with each other. For today, we have a great line of speakers, and for this specific track, we have 2 exciting keynote speakers. Yes, not just one. So we'll have Miriam Gonzalez, who's the board president at HOT, and Claire Melamed, who's the CEO at the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. But before we get to that, we would like to thank a number of people who are our sponsors for this conference. So we'd really like to thank Esri, Facebook, Critizen, and Mapbox for supporting the HOT Summit and enabling it to run as a virtual conference, enabling so many people from around the world to join. And speaking about our sponsors, we have exciting news to share. So today, HOT and Esri are announcing the partnership where they're going to grant one local community a total of $5,000 and a slot to attend the next HOT Summit, the 7th HOT Summit. Obviously, we do not know where it will be, but yeah, there'll be one slot for someone to attend the summit. And the grant will be, as I shared, for a local community where anyone can apply and share how they're using open mapping, in particular OSM, to design solutions to problems that we're facing in our communities. And to get more information about this, you can check the link on the left. It's a bit.ly link. It's HOT Summit 2020 microgrant to get more information. Applications are open and the deadline is 4th of January. Yeah, so for everyone who's here, kindly have a look at it, give it a shot and apply. And even as we continue, just some house rules to follow. There's a Q&A session at the bottom. There's a chat section. Feel free, I can see people are sharing who they are, where they're joining from. Feel free to share that as well. As we'll be having our sessions, the keynote and everything, if you have any questions, kindly post them there, and then we might be able to answer a few after each session. Social media, share that you are attending the summit, tag us at using the hashtag HOT Summit, tag us on the HOTSM account. And lastly, there's a goose chase, which is a virtual scavenger hunt. So you can join it. You can check out the website or even install the application and use the code that's on your screen to participate. And there'll be a winner at the end of the summit who will be announced on social media, and they'll reach out to you also on email. And so if you have any other questions regarding the summit, kindly send us an email on summit@hotosm.org, or even reach out to us on social media and you'll be able to get an answer. So without taking any more time, we'll go directly and start this track. And first we'll have Miriam Gonzalez, who, as I'd shared, is the board president at HOTOSM. So Miriam, you can go ahead and start.
Thank you, Laura. So welcoming, Karibu. Hola, hi everyone. My name is Miriam Gonzalez, mapanauta in the OSM and social media world. Currently, I'm supporting the organization as president of the board of directors, as Laura said. It's an honor to be here welcoming all of you in the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap Summit. Originally, we were going to be meeting in person in Cape Town, South Africa this summer, but life had different plans for all of us. The last hot event I attended was Heidelberg 2019, and I never imagined it would take a couple of years until we meet again. In these uncertain times, in the ones we don't have the opportunity to meet in person, but we see the approval of vaccines are taking place or are on the way, it's a good time to ask ourselves, what lessons have we learned from COVID? In the humanitarian mapping world, almost 20,000 people contributed to multiple COVID-19 response mapping efforts. This has grown from 450 for Haiti in 2010 and around 8,000 people for Nepal in 2015. So 20,000 people supporting is an amazing number. But if we focus only on mapping, we won't have a sustainable long-term project. How can we make sure this data is really used? What can be added to the equation? I have two good examples in the ones we can share how COVID response has been supporting organizations. One of them is iLab, who was able to map all functional healthcare and COVID facilities across Liberia to OpenStreetMap. iLab is a non-profit tech organization that supported the central government and the people of Liberia in open data, access to information, peace building, election data management since 2011. Another organization is GAL in Peru, which they have trained local government, health, and social development workers in using open source solutions such as Kobo Toolkit, QGIS, as part of their everyday work. Also, they provided maps to support oxygen delivery in rural regions around Cusco. Other lessons I learned from COVID is that, of course, staying connected is more important and relevant than ever. Another one is communities around the world have come together to support each other. From neighbors in the same building that maybe before they used to say hi to each other, and now they are really looking forward to each other. From communities to countries, we are trying to support one to another. And the third point also relevant for this summit is easier access for people for attending global events as speakers and also as participants. Every year the events organizers, I hear how they are struggling to give travel grants because there is not enough budget to bring everyone on the events. Knowledge sharing, at least in conference and summits, is more accessible, and even there have been hybrid events like Post for Oceania, which prepare regional hubs combined with online participation. Some hubs were in Perth, Australia, Fiji, and other islands in the Pacific. Today, we're having the opportunity of having a non-centralized and geographically diverse summit. More than 800 attendees from every region in the world, representing more than 300 organizations. This is by far the largest number of participants and the most diverse as well. A big thank you to the event collaborators and also the sponsors, World Bank, Esri, Facebook, and MacBooks. As most of you are aware, HOT is reaching a very important milestone that will define the future of the organization. Receiving the audacious project grant can help in so many ways, but it's important not to forget that over the past years, we have heard voices concerned about a sort of separation between HOT organization, HOT community, and humanitarian mapping volunteers. It's a great opportunity to create new bonds in the ones local communities can be empowered with training, resources. They can support with their local knowledge the goal to map more than 94 countries which suffer from disasters, crisis, poverty, lack of infrastructure, and with open geospatial data, the realities can be changed. One of the main goals is how we can integrate the voice of humanitarian mappers, voting members, OSM collaborators with HOT action plans, so the regional offices and the overall project can be really being supporting the local community's needs and challenges and can be sustainable in the long term. OSM communities can live without HOT, but HOT cannot exist without the involvement of the communities. Just to close my participation, please feel free to raise your hand and your voice. We are having a new opportunity to make visible all those people who are invisible now. 1 billion people that we can support and help to change the realities. Thanks for being here and helping to shape together the future of the humanitarian mapping in OSM. Gracias, thank you, muito obrigada, asante sana.
Thank you so much, Miriam. Yeah, it was really, really amazing to hear from you, and you even you sharing more on the importance of these virtual conferences, and even in future for conferences trying to have a hybrid nature so that we can have more participants participating and attending such conferences, and also just sharing the value of community, even to HOT as an organization and the OSM in general. So we'll have a second keynote as well from Claire Melamed, who is the CEO at the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. So Claire, you can go ahead and start.
Thank you, Miriam. Thank you, everybody. My name's Claire Melamed, and I'm the CEO of the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. The OpenStreetMap community is such an important community in our partnership, and we've worked so well with so many, I'm sure, of you who are here today over the 5 years of our existence. We're exactly half your age. And so it's really real pleasure to be here today to meet some of you virtually, even if not in person, and return the favour slightly. And I can see we've got I've loved seeing all of the places where everybody is calling in from. I'm speaking to you today from my living room in, as you can see, a rather dark and rainy London. So data is power. I say that quite a lot when I'm speaking and when I'm writing. And what I mean by that is that data is something that can be used to change lives for the better. So either by people using data as a tool for campaigns and advocacy, or by governments who use data to deliver better services and understand people's needs. And of course, all of you, the OpenStreetMap community, know that better than anyone, because you live it every day. You're united in your common belief that data, that mapping will help people to understand their societies better and bring familiarity, knowledge, and then resources and change ultimately to a place that might otherwise not get it. Now, it's absolutely true that data is power and data is powerful, but just saying that, I increasingly feel, the more times I say it, that really that's a little bit too easy. And it probably hides as much as it shows in terms of what data really is and what it does in the world. Because of course, data may have power, but power shapes what data is as well as what it does. And I think we need to be clear-eyed about that if we're to use data's power for good. The superpower of data is to scale up individual experience into a general pattern. So every new baby, like this little boy on his mother's shoulder in India, is a precious and individual thing, of course, to its parents, to the people who love that child. But to get a picture of how whole societies are changing, we need to have the data on all the births in a given day or a week or a month. We need to collect those numbers, turn all of those individual precious experiences into data so that we can plan for where schools or houses will be needed in the years to come. Data is the collection of individual experiences, but then of course that begs the question, which individuals and which experiences? Because data doesn't drop from the sky. It's not a sort of essential thing that we can just pick up in the street. It's produced, it's analyzed, it's used in a world that in itself is shaped by power in every dimension: the power of money, the power of patriarchy, the power of racial privilege. How does power shape data? Data is something which is created by people. Like this woman with the mobile phone here in the slide is an enumerator in the streets of Accra, a district in Accra in Ghana, collecting data from the men that you see there on the slide. Data ultimately starts with words, with conversations. And the production of data like that in all its forms is shaped by power and by the inequalities in power that mark our world. What's in and what's out depends on who has power, whether that's political, social, or economic. So for one example, in a world that's shaped by patriarchy, traditionally it's been men that have decided what to count, which of people's experiences should be included in the data. And so as a result, there are some really important parts of people's lives that are almost invisible in data. Data on domestic violence, for example, is pretty poor in most countries. And domestic work doesn't actually count when countries come to calculate their gross domestic product, their economic metrics. Who is counted is a product of deliberate choices. Sometimes this is quite a practical thing. People who live in remote areas, or the homeless, or those living in institutions, of course, are just more difficult to reach and more difficult for people like this woman here in the picture to count and to find. But sometimes it's also a product of deliberate choices made on the part of those who are in charge of collecting data. So just to take one example, the USAID funded DHS survey, which is the source of a huge amount of the data that's used by researchers and governments to understand health trends in many poorer countries. If you use a number about maternal mortality or anything to do with children's health, likely it comes from DHS originally. But women over 49 are excluded from that survey because originally the donors who pay for it are interested in collecting information about children's health and mother's health. And of course, women over 49 who are considered to be past the years of bearing children are not of interest to the survey. So there's a huge chunk of data that we all rely on that, whether we know it or not, is excluding a very large portion of the population. Older women are not counted in that data. And of course, it's not only that people are excluded from data. Sometimes in conditions of, where power is working against people, they might choose to exclude themselves from the data. It's a bit of a negative power, but opting out of the data can be a strategy of last resort. If people fear the power of government to do harm, they don't want to be seen. And if people don't trust the government, they might deliberately exclude themselves from the data that's collected. It's just another reason why, on the whole, bad governments lead to bad data. And then, of course, more recently, what I'm talking about here is data mainly that's collected from a survey or a census and a very personal interaction. But more recently, data is also shaped and been shaped by economic power and the economic transformations brought by technology. Because existing patterns of economic power and inequality are shaping the production of data from new technologies. That area, incredibly dynamic area where volumes of data are growing enormously every day, every week. Just for one example, only 10 countries in Africa has ever launched a satellite into space, but the USA has nearly 2,000 satellites into orbit. And of course, those of you who work with the imagery that comes from satellites will recognize the power of being able to control the hardware and the satellites that are orbiting our world every day. We think a lot about big data. Only half of the world's population has access to the internet. And it won't surprise any of you to learn that more men than women have mobile phones. All data is not created equal. And this matters because governments can't solve problems that they can't see. If you're not visible in the data, then you're less visible to those who have power to solve your problems. The powerless, by being invisible, become even less powerful. But data and the work done by people like you, by those who are collecting data in communities, can be a way of getting some power back. This picture is from Kenya, where the Open Institute has been doing, our partner, the Open Institute, has been doing some amazing, painstaking work with the community of Lanet Umoja, collecting data on the community's needs and what's available in the area. And armed with the numbers, they were able, over several years of extremely hard work and very effective advocacy, to make the case to the local government authorities for a new dispensary pharmacy in the village, which made necessary medicines and advice available locally to people for the first time. Imagine what that means. You don't have to walk for hours to get the necessary medicine that will cure you of that chronic illness, which is, meaning that you can't work, you can't look after your children. It took 2 years, mind you, of data collection, of advocacy, of the community speaking to the local government through the numbers that it was collected and using the power of data. But the new dispensary was opened in 2017, and this is a picture of the community at the opening, celebrating the launch of the new dispensary. People collecting and using data on their own needs can rebalance that power of data. Now, it's not just about single numbers, because a single data point, whatever its source, doesn't actually have much power. Data on one person. It can tell you a limited amount about that one person, of course, but to be useful, to be really powerful, Data needs to be combined and classified to reveal patterns and to prove or disprove hypotheses that can lead to action. Data become more powerful as it's used to turn single data points into groups. And so the power to define the groups is another place where power shapes data and what it's used for. Essentially, it's the power to decide what story the data is going to be telling us. Of course, we see what we look for in the data that we have. So in the UK, for example, the higher death rate of ethnic minorities from COVID was missed at first. Nobody saw it because we just saw the deaths as one single number. But the government statisticians got to work on the data to try to understand the patterns and identified this awful reality of the inequalities in the death rate from COVID. Understanding a problem is the first step towards solving it. And of course, researchers who look for patterns in the data are at the mercy of their own assumptions and the prejudices, but the good ones and the thoughtful ones and those who work in groups with others can recognize these and correct for them. So in this case of COVID deaths, for example, statisticians had to see race as a relevant category to ask the question before the pattern could become visible. But increasingly, as we know, it's machines that run the algorithms that are necessary to turn our modern volumes of data into those useful categories of data to create the insights. And the machines can replicate and sometimes even worsen the inequalities in our societies because they take these assumptions and these prejudices that we all have and they amplify them. And you will all have your favorite examples of this. There are so many. An algorithm used for sentencing convicted criminals in the US that gave longer sentences to black men than to white men. An algorithm used to determine the expected exam results that gave higher grades in the UK to more privileged children after the COVID pandemic this spring made sitting the exams impossible. So both of these things we know about because the bias and the prejudice was discovered and ultimately those algorithms were disused. So it shows that we can correct for these biases, but as more and more decisions are made with these high volume data sets that need algorithms for analysis, we have to understand how they're made and we have to understand how power works in them and how the assumptions and the prejudices embedded in them can distort the data. And of course, categories can be used politically as well, like national boundaries on maps. Drawing boundaries around groups of people can be an instrument of power. And apartheid South Africa used the categorization of people into groups as an essential element of the apparatus of control, and data reflected that and helped to enforce apartheid laws. And the rebuilding of the statistical system after apartheid is one of the lesser told stories of South Africa's transition, but incredibly important one. So it's not just the creation of data that's shaped by existing power relationships. The process of organizing data and analyzing it, through which data becomes the information to shape policy, it's a product of power too. And that we mustn't forget that data can seem like an incredibly neutral and incredibly technical thing, but top to bottom, it's embedded in societies, and the power and the prejudice of societies is built into data. And unless we watch out, it can amplify the inequalities and the injustices that those of us who believe in data hope that data can be an instrument in solving. What do we do about this? Data is now, perhaps it always was, but even more so now, a fundamental part of the fabric of our societies. It's made in its creation by the very inequalities and injustices that we want to challenge, and the stories it tells are by and large the stories of the powerful, and yet we continue to believe that it can be an instrument of social change. I don't think we're wrong about this. I continue to be hopeful about the power of data as one of the instruments in the toolkit for social change, and a critical one. And I think the answer really is in our hands in two ways. First of all, those of us who are lucky enough to live in democratic political societies have power in our own hands through those democratic political systems. In democracies, it's governments that rebalance power. And they've been, we've seen there are lots of examples through whether it's by regulating monopolies or guaranteeing the freedom of the courts. Governments, part of the essential function of governments in democratic societies is to regulate power imbalances between citizens and other big entities that would seek to take their power away, be that a company or the government itself. Governments have been quite slow on taking quite a long time for politics to catch up with technology in this area, but data needs to come under democratic management, and that will involve lots of messy compromises. We think about privacy is always the first thing that comes to mind when we talk about data governance, but it's much more than that. Governance needs to take into account all of the power relationships embedded within the data and balance the costs and the benefits, the risks and the rewards. It's a huge task. It's going to be slow. For those of us who want things to happen quickly, it's going to be frustrating. But it's essential for those of us who believe in the power of data to do good, and you in the OpenStreetMap community have so many examples of how it can be done well. And these need to be part of the democratic debate on how to regulate data in all its forms to make sure that power is balanced and that data can do the job that we know it can do in helping to right wrongs and make the invisible visible. And I'd love to see more civil society activity around the governance of data. It can feel a bit of an intimidating technical discussion, but it's something that we all have a stake in and we should all be demanding. The second thing I think, and this brings me to the beginning perhaps of your summit and the end of my talk, is that numbers are now one of our global languages for change. And we are all producers of data, none more so than you in the OpenStreetMap community. We can make data into power. If we're concerned about people being left out of the data or the data being used in ways that make inequality work, we have the tools in our hands to organize and act. All of you and others like you are collecting data with communities, and together you're using it to force policymakers to listen to them. In the end, data is power because it's a way for people to speak directly to power through being included in their data. And you're in the forefront of making this happen. And you're going to bring the power of 1 billion people's voices into the data over the next 5 years. I'm so excited about this project and it's amazing. And the work of the OpenStreetMap community shows every day how data is a power that can, if we will it, be collected, be analyzed and used for good to protect the vulnerable and to reduce injustice. Thank you so much for listening to me today, and I wish you all the very, very best for the summit.
Thank you so much, Claire, for that enlightening and insightful presentation and keynote. Because of time, we got 2 questions for you, but because of time, we'll share the questions with you and then we'll be able to share the answers with the rest of the audience, either on social media or after the conference. Yeah, once again, thank you so much, Claire and Miriam, for the amazing conference opening keynotes. And without much more to say, we'll just jump right into the other talks. So just a note before we get started is that we'll be having 2